All right, folks. All right, folks. We're back here. We're ranking the Dream Theater albums. We've done two sessions so far. We did 12 through 15. I'm sorry, we did 13 through 15, and we did 10 through 12. Now we're going to go 9, 8, and 7. And this is, we're getting into some of the classic Dream Theater albums, some of the fan favorites. Not the very top of our list, but some pretty great albums, quite frankly. And we're going to start with Sean's number 9, which is called A View from the Top of the World, the 2021 release. And this is, I'll let Sean kind of take over from here. But just real quick, this is the album that debuted in October of 2021. It's the last Mike Mangini album. It has the Alien, the opening track, which garnered not only a Grammy nomination but a Grammy win. So I'm gonna put on a little Alien right now, and I'll let Sean kind of talk over it and give his thoughts on his number 9 ranked album out of 15, Dream Theater, A View from the Top of the World.
Okay, so View from the Top of the World just came out in 2021, right in the middle of the pandemic, or I guess towards the tail end of the pandemic. And this is the album where they really hit it out of the park with that opening track called The Alien. Okay, so let's start with that. The Alien's phenomenal in terms of technical proficiency and from a songwriting standpoint. I love the catchy soaring guitar melody. It hooks you into the song. Again, great technicality throughout, especially in the instrumental sections. For me, the exclamation point on this song are the vocals at the end of the song, which for me are what make this song so memorable. I think James LeBrie just hits it out of the park at the end of that song. I could easily see that song coming back into their set list again. In terms of the other tracks, I love the use of the 8-string guitar on Awaken the Master. I think that's the first time Petrucci has used that instrument, and he just blows you away with that heaviness on that one. Then we have songs like Transcending Time and Invisible Monster, which are really strong in the songwriting department. I really like Jordan Rudess's contributions on this album. I think he really puts his best foot forward here in terms of the songwriting and creating a great soundscape for the keyboards. Lastly, the title track, it's a 20-minute closer. Some really strong heaviness here. I like that when they mix the album, they put John Mayung's bass up in the mix, especially in this one section that lasts about 3 or 4 minutes, where John Mayung is really present in the mix. I mean, from this point forward, every album is so strong, it's really hard to distinguish where should I put this one. But I think on this one, the reason why it's a little bit lower than some other people might put it is because, LeBrie's vocals aren't quite what they used to be 15, 20 years ago, but he still sounds really good here. So this was my number 9.
Hey, listen, this is a great album. It's so it's really Mike Mangini's swan song as far as his time in Dream Theater. It's I think the best. It's the best Dream Theater album one of the best Dream Theater albums, maybe in my opinion the best Dream Theater album with Mike Mangini. I'll get to my comments a little bit later on this because it's a little bit higher on my list. Obviously, the Alien, they knocked it out of the park when they released that in August of 2021. People were kind of like, "This is going to be a great album," and my expectations were high based on what some of the band members said while they were recording it and during the pre-release. But I'll give my comments a little bit later when we get to that album. But right now, we're going to go to, after Sean's number 9 being A View, my number 9, which is, it's called Octavarium. this album came out in 2005, and obviously people are very familiar with this album. Uh, being excuse me, I don't have it up yet. Just give me a second. Um, if you go back to this time period for Dream Theater, it was a lot about making more of a commercial album, making something that sounds a little bit like U2 or sounds a little bit like some of the mainstream bands of that era. In particular, I think there was some thought about going to going to sound a little bit like Muse. So yeah, this to me is a great album. As you can see, I've shown you Octavarium and I've shown you the list of tracks. Notably, there's a These Walls 2009 remastered version, which is worth a listen. If you like that song, if you like this album, it's a basically they just kind of like pump up the volume. You can hear more distinguished bass drum notes. You can hear more distinguished toms. Labrie sounds louder. It's a clear. It's not a better mix. It's just a more clear version of the song. If you like These Walls, the title track of the album, Octavarium, I think is one of the best Dream Theater songs. It's probably a top 10 Dream Theater song of mine. 24 minutes. It's got lyrical contributions from various members of the band. I believe it's Portnoy and Petrucci wrote those lyrics together. Part of it is based on a movie with Robert De Niro and Robin Williams called Awakenings. It's about a guy at the beginning of I think it's the second part of the song that speaks to that movie and this person's struggle coming out of a coma for 30 years, basically being in a coma for 30 years. That's part of the lyrical content. There's also some interesting lyrics by Portnoy at the end of the song talking about being trapped in an octavarium. So one of the themes of Octavarium was a 5/8 concept. It's their eighth album. There's 8 songs on the album. There's to this point there had been 8 members of Dream Theater in total. That was part of the 8 theme. So there's a 5/8 theme in each and every song. I believe they go through every octave I believe it's the first or the last note of every song of the album. They play a different octave, so they play all 8 octaves at one time throughout the album. So there's this 5/8 theme, and you can look it up on Google to get all the intricacies of it. But really, it's the music that I love. I Walk Beside You. I think that's a great, catchy song. Panic Attack is a fan favorite. It's got a powerful bass line in the beginning. They're playing it on the current tour, so it's obviously important to the band as well. It was used in a gaming. It was used in an electronic game, and it's probably one of the most downloaded single songs by Dream Theater. Speaking of Panic Attack, only downside of this album is that it's one of the albums where John Myung did not contribute lyrically. So that, to me, is a little bit of a flaw because he's one of their better, if not the best lyricists in the band. The Root of All Evil, the first track is a little weak. It's part of I think they kind of just banged it out and came out with it's part of Mike Portnoy's 12-step suite from recovery from alcoholism. So I think that's probably one of the weaker songs on the album. But overall, it's a great album with just a couple of reservations. And this just happens to be Sean's number 8, so we'll segue. We'll go to Sean's number 8 album, also Octavarium.
Right. Yeah. Good points there. About how it's basically a different kind of concept album. And you mentioned that they started in the key of F. I think it was F minor with the first song, which is the root note, and then they ended the Octavarium. The last track is the 8th note in the octave, which is also F minor. So they go, and then in between, there's intervals between each song. So they go from F, and then in Root of All Evil, and then there's an interval where Jordan's making these sounds on the keyboard. You can hear it, between each track where they're playing intervals. So between F and G, the second song is in G. He plays something in F sharp, which is also G flat, and then they have those intervals between every song on the album. So they play the 8 songs are in F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, but there's also between most of the tracks they're playing the intervals as well. So it's interesting. It's a different kind of concept album. It's not your traditional concept album where they're lyrically everything is tied together, but it is a concept album in its own way. So yeah, I have this. But that's interesting what you brought up about the lyrics that were written about the Robert De Niro character, or the characters in that movie Awakenings. But for this one, when I put this whole list together, I thought, well, if there's certain songs in the album that never really sank in with me and it didn't totally click with me, then that would be why I moved that album down a little bit. And on this album, I actually like the opener, The Root of All Evil. I actually like that one quite a bit. I like the heaviness and the guitar solo in there, and I like the way they don't draw it out for too long. I think they might have on the first 2 parts of that. There's 2 parts. I think the first one was 13 minutes, and the one on Train of Thought was 11 minutes or so for the 12-step suite. But I think I like this one more than any other song in that 12-step suite because it's more to the point. They don't waste a lot of time, but they keep the whole theme going by the repeating riffs and allowing the listener to tie the first 2 songs together with this one. But in terms of this album, I don't really ever feel the need to listen to The Answer Lies Within. And I thought that Sacrifice Sons was something we didn't need to hear at that point because it was 5 years after 9/11, and they're bringing us back to that's pretty much all anybody talked about for the 2 years after that happened, and then here we are in 2005, so maybe 4 years later, and they're bringing it up again. I just thought, well, I don't know. That one just kind of was a little stale for me. But in terms of what I love about this album, I like the song "These Walls," the title track. Some people don't like the long intro, but I like Jordan's playing there because it draws you in as a listener, and then it has some melodic, top 40 kind of sounding material, some technical instrumental stuff. They do some interesting things lyrically, which I believe works well within the song. I like Mike Portnoy bringing in the Muse influence here. If you listen to the Absolution album by Muse, you can hear the influence from songs like The Stockholm Syndrome and Hysteria on the tracks Panic Attack and Never Enough. Never Enough has kind of a space rock kind of solo or interlude that they do on guitar that John Petrucci does on guitar, which I really like. Tear Down These Walls, again, great commercial rocker. I enjoy it's like a Journey influenced, radio friendly lead guitar line that kind of hooks you in at the end before they hit you with that heavy riff. Very memorable. But I think what distinguishes this album from the songs that are higher on my list is that there's just those 2 tracks that they never really sunk in with me, that I don't feel the need to listen to. But the rest of the album is phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, look, This is Dream Theater. They set the bar pretty high with some of their earlier albums, and over the course of their career, they've put out so much complicated musicianship, orchestration. They, regardless of the fact that some of their lyrics are not great, they do put effort into their lyrics, as they did with Octavarium. They don't just sing whatever comes out of their mouth, so they care about the lyrical value of the songs. It's not something that they simply say we don't care. I think some bands you could probably accuse them of that, quite frankly. And Octavarium has some good lyrical content, but really the takeaway from this album is if you want to hear a great Dream Theater song, if you're a new listener to Dream Theater, the song Octavarium is a good place to start. It shows their diversity. Portnoy's got some great work on his hi hat. He's got some great subtle embellishments during some of the low points of the song, or some of the more subdued parts of the song. But really, if you're a new listener, Octavarium, the song, the 24-minute epic, is a good place to start. So why don't we move on? Now we're going to move on to another Dream Theater album. This one is my number 8, and it is called Dramatic Turn of Events. This is a transition album. It's the first album with Mike Mangini. Look, everybody knows they had to make a statement after Mike Portnoy left the band. Mike Portnoy was an integral part of this band up until this album. He was a founding member. He was a very huge influence on the band in so many ways. We talked about Systematic Chaos and Black Clouds and Silver Linings, and that maybe the band had started to lean a little bit too much away from progressive and more towards a darker, edgier metal kind of feel with those two albums. And as you know, we had those lower on our list at number 11 and 12. So this is the first album out of the gate with Mike Mangini, and it did not disappoint. When this came out in 2011, the first song they released was On the Backs of Angels. Starts out with a nice melodic guitar picking intro. I believe he overdubbed it, if I'm using the right terminology. He overdubbed the same guitar line 6 times, so it sounds like a very full picking. Obviously, it's very precise the way he did it. It has some really emotional solos on the part of Jordan Rudess. He was quoted many times while recording this album and upon its release that they really dug deep. They really made an album that they really wanted to be very proud of, and they wanted the remaining band members wanted to make a statement. And what you'll see throughout this album is if you like Images and Words, then you should definitely listen to this album in its entirety. A lot of the songs are structured similar to or almost identical to some of the songs off of Images and Words, for example. Even though when I first heard On the Backs of Angels, I was blown away by it, but it wasn't until Sean and I talked that I realized, you know what? Structurally, this song is almost identical to Pull Me Under. It didn't have the rock Pull Me Under anthem, but it had a lot of the same song structure, a lot of the same chord progressions. They just mixed it up a little bit to make it sound different. It's really a genius idea, this album. Some of the other highlights of the album, I think, are Breaking All Illusions. This marks the return of John Mayung as a lyricist. He didn't write all of the lyrics to that song. I think it's notable to mention that his lyrics came back into play immediately after Mike Portnoy had left the band. And I think that was something that the band was lacking in Portnoy's later years of his first tenure, those last 2, 3, 4 albums. There was no lyrical content by Mayung. Mayung's an amazing poet. When he sits down and he writes lyrics, they're some of the best that the band has. I think we'll talk about this more as we get down to the better albums, but some of the great lyrical contributions come from John Mayung, even though he only writes one song per album now, and that's typically what it's been. But this album marks a return to some really great lyricists, a really great lyrical contribution by Mayung, Breaking All Illusions, which happens to be structured after Learning to Live. There's some of the same chord progression. Some of the keyboard parts imitate the guitar parts in the introduction to Learning to Live. Just a great symphonic masterpiece of a song. Sean, you can comment on this as well. I'll say one more thing about this album. I think Beneath the Surface is a unique lyrical idea about someone who's been holding things in for a long time in a relationship and their voice isn't heard. It's not the type of lyrics that you typically hear from Dream Theater or any other band. It's very insightful the way he wrote out that song. It's a beautiful song on an acoustic guitar. This is James really shines on this song. He goes up an octave towards the end of the song. And there's a beautiful keyboard lead, which to some people sounds a little weird because it's an acoustic song with an electronic, yes, kind of keyboard lead, but it's very soulful. Up to that point, I think it was his best lead solo by Rudess, I'm speaking of. I think it was his best solo up until that point on Beneath the Surface. So basically just a great album. And Sean, what are your comments on this album?
Okay, so yeah, this is my number 7. Yeah, good points there about the solo by Jordan Rudess. To me, sounds a little bit like Keith Emerson. If you've ever heard, I think Keith Emerson was one of his heroes, even more than um, more than anyone from that era, from what I've heard him say. And that solo there is definitely one of Jordan's best, and reminds me a little bit of Keith Emerson. Um, I'm with you on Breaking All Illusions. Definitely one of their best tracks. They had to really nail it on this one because this was their first album without their other main songwriter. So it seemed like they just were trying to go back to the classic Dream Theater sound. And they weren't going too far out of the comfort zone here, but maybe that's a good thing, not taking too many chances, because every song on this album, really, for me, is pretty strong. Even the second track where they kind of bring a different vibe. It's called Build Me Up, Break Me Down. I like that one. Lost Not Forgotten, super strong. Love the heaviness in that song. This Is the Life is just kind of a melodic, reflective kind of song with a great ending that kind of reminds me of the end of Comfortably Numb by Pink Floyd. Bridges in the Sky is so powerful. Just for me, right up there with Breaking All Illusions. So yeah, excellent album, and you have to give them an A on this, considering that they were entering a different phase of their career.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with pretty much everything you said. You'll hear on Lost Not Forgotten, you'll hear some similarities to Under a Glass Moon.
Yeah.
Again, it's structurally though, so you don't feel like you're listening to the same song, which is an important point because they're not identical. They just used images and words as a template for this album. So Lost Not Forgotten, similar to Under a Glass Moon. If you listen to Outcry, there's some Metropolis Part 1 feeling. There's a run with Jordan and Petrucci that sounds a bit like a Change of Seasons. Sounds a bit like King Crimson on some of their classic material. Still speaking of Outcry. And then you have Build Me Up, Break You Down, which is based on a song by Red. It's basically a ripoff of a song by Red. I don't recall the name of that song, but I think it
Red?
works. Red's a band that John Petrucci was heavily influenced by around the time they wrote this song. I believe the name of the band is Red. And he basically took and this was pointed out by Portnoy on the internet. He said, "Hey, look, these guys are struggling. They're not coming up with any new ideas." But I think, as you said, sometimes you just go with what works, and they made a great progressive metal album. One drawback I will say, and that's why this is not higher on my list, but the one drawback with a dramatic turn of events is that the drums don't sound organic and they don't sound powerful. You could tell that when they were mixing this album and when they were producing this album, Mangini was not part of the songwriting process. His drums are brilliant, but they're a little bit subdued because he was basically just trying to mirror what John Petrucci had done on a drum machine when they wrote the album. He was not a part of the songwriting process. He was kind of a part-time member of the band at this point. They wanted to make an album, just the four of them. And so that's probably the only drawback, is that the drums, they just don't sound, the bass drum and the snare drum just don't sound that great. They don't sound that loud. They sound subdued. They sound a little clicky. And that's really the only criticism I have of the album. I'll make the comparison, and I'll use this as a segue to go to my number 7, which is album we just spoke about. And that is Back to A View from the Top of the World, which is my number 7. And, this, when you go from listening to a dramatic turn of events to A View from the Top of the World, you can really hear the difference in the engineering and the production of the sound around the drums. You have the Alien, which just comes out, and he's doing double bass drum rolls. He's doing these massive fills, and throughout the album, you can hear his, nice, solid, loud snare drum, good sounding bass drum. And so that kind of tells you what you need to know about about the sound of the drums on A View from the Top of the World. They really knocked it out of the park with this album. I hope to hear similar drum sounds on Parasomnia. I think based on the first single, it sounds like they have a good full sound, a nice sounding snare drum. A View from the Top of the World, as far as the drums go, I think Petrucci was still trying to get a little bit of the images and words drum sound that he seemed to be a bit preoccupied with when mixing and recording, but the drum sound on A View from the Top of the World works. It's fine. They did a good job, and that's the only downside I have with a dramatic turn of events, is that the drums just don't sound that great. But like, as I said, just moving forward with A View from the Top of the World, just top to bottom, great album. This is my number 7. We're getting into some of the best albums I think they have. They have a 20-minute epic, A View from the Top of the World, which I think is, maybe not a top 10 Dream Theater song, but they put a lot of effort into this. Great musicianship, great odd time, great tricky, you don't know where the one is kind of song. Awaken the Master, as you mentioned, is I believe a 9-minute song. The lyrics are written by John Mayung. He makes several references to Neil Peart's lyrics. This album was recorded, the lyrics presumably written a few months after Neil Peart died. So it was kind of a tribute in part. The song is in part a tribute to Neil Peart and his lyrical contributions to the music industry. You hear allusions to Hold Your Fire. You hear allusions to Counterparts. You hear allusions to a couple other albums, I believe. So that's a great one lyrically. That's the John Mayung contribution, which was missing during the Mike Portnoy later years. You have Invisible Monster, which has kind of got a Metropolis riff. It works. Bree sounds great. This is a more mature James LaBrie on this album. He had kind of passed his prime. But whatever they do in the studio to get his vocals sounding decent, they come off great. The Alien was a Grammy winner, their first. Like I said, when I first heard that song when it came out, I was not disappointed. I was not disappointed with this album. Top to bottom, a great album. Again, my number 7. I can't say enough about it. No songs are disappointments. Like you said, he uses the 8 string on Awaken the Master. Just a great album overall. I'll let you take it from here, Sean.
Yeah, no, that's good points there. Definitely, I think their go-to guy now with the mixing and mastering. I'm assuming he did the new album. Guy's name is Andy Sneap. He does a lot of other big name bands, like he does Judas Priest. They had Paul, just to dovetail on your points about the sound on Dramatic Turn of Events, that the kind of disappointing engineering there was kind of laid at the doorstep of Paul Northfield. Maybe that wasn't fair, but they never used him again after that album, as far as I know. And with Andy Sneap, he the album sounds great, and I think he deserves some of the credit because I just love the way everything's mixed on this album. I'm trying to see if he participate in Distance Over Time. I'm not sure.
Paul Northfield?
No. Andy Sneap, because he did A View from the Top of the World, which sounds great.
I don't
He's done a
remember.
lot
I know.
of
I thought a guy named Andy Wallace did the mix on A Dramatic Turn of Events, and it was kind of disappointing.
Yeah. Andy Wallace did the mix, but Paul Northfield was the engineer. This guy's mostly does mostly metal bands. This Andy Sneap. I think he's actually in Judas Priest now. He's actually their second guitar player. He's done, like Overkill, Accept, Testament, all those metal bands. So, but the album sounds great, and I guess this was his first album with Dream Theater, and he also did Terminal Velocity, which was John Petrucci's most recent solo album, which is a really good sounding guitar-oriented album. So I guess they're going to stick with him, I assume. Yeah, he did this one too. Engineering, mixing, and mastering for Parasomnia, the one coming out next year.
Wasn't there a guy named Richard Chicky on?
Yeah, he mixed and engineered the self-titled album. He's the guy who was in Winter Rose with James LeBray.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and then he did some work on Dramatic Turn of Events, and then he mixed and engineered the self-titled album, as far as I know. But yeah, that is a really good sounding album.
Yeah, it's just it's like I said, it got to number 7 on my list. You had we talked about Octavarium. We talked a little bit about A Dramatic Turn of Events. So really, that's pretty much as far as The View from the Top of the World. Again, we're getting down to some of the better Dream Theater albums. This is the, in my opinion, of the 5. Mangini albums, this one's the best. Did not disappoint. So really, I think we're pretty much set to move on to our top 6, and that'll be in our next session. I hope you tune in.
Sounds good. We'll see you then.